Good afternoon. My name is Jamela Johnston. I'm the MST Program Supervisor with Magnolia Family Service. And as we mentioned earlier, multisystemic therapy, that's the topic that I'm going to be speaking about today. So what is MST? MST stands for Multisystemic Therapy. It is community-based treatment. All of our services are provided in the home, beginning with the assessment all the way up until termination. Our focus is on empowering caregivers to solve current and future problems. We work within the entire ecology of the family, simply meaning that we don't strictly work with the individual like many traditional therapies may do. We work with the family, we work with peers, school, and also in the neighborhood. As far as MST goes, it is an evidence-based practice. There's a lot of different quality assurance processes that are in place, and we'll talk about a little bit of those a little bit later. Where is MST being used? MST is currently being used all across the world. As of today, there are actually 430 MST teams in the United States. So I always tell people that come in and apply with us at Magnolia that by receiving this training and working as an MST therapist, you really make yourself marketable. And if you want to leave and transfer to somewhere else or even go out of the country, you can apply for an MST position there because the training is transferable. Families as the solution. MST really focuses on family being the key to success. MST does not only work with the individual, but we work in empowering the family to make the changes that they need to sustain the desired behaviors over a long period of time. When seeking outside assistance, which involves like hospitalization, substance abuse treatment, or even incarceration, two things can happen. Either the delinquent behavior can either improve or it can completely subside and you won't see it anymore. But usually what's responsible for that is either the counselor in that setting that's contributing to that change or the structure of the setting. So of course we know that when the individual leaves that setting and goes back into their home, if that home is not consistent with that same setting within the system that they just left, then what do we have? We have a high risk of them engaging in those delinquent behaviors again. MST assumes that families already have the skills to make the changes that they need to make. We don't label clients as being resistant. I know even myself, I tell my therapist, sometimes it's a hard habit to break because we want to say, when mom's not meeting with us, well, maybe this client is resistant. And with MST, no client is resistant. Here are a few MST champions and advocates. When I go and meet with the different judges in the area, I always let them know that this model is backed by the U.S. Surgeon General, also the U.S. Department of Justice as well. It has been approved to treat substance abuse in addition to other delinquent behaviors. You also will see Blueprints for Violence Prevention supports the MST model. So how does MST work? We'll talk a little bit about MST assumptions, the theoretical assumptions, and how MST is implemented. So the child's behavior is strongly influenced by their families, friends, and communities. These people are called the key participants. So anytime we begin, we open a case, we contact the key participants and we ask them, what would you like the desired outcomes to be for this individual youth? Because they too will have an impact on treatment. Again, families are key to success. They can maintain the long-term change. I always remind my therapists that we are in their lives literally for 3 to 4 months. After that, it is expected that the families would have the skills that they need to continue to maintain that change. Change can occur quickly. Our main goal with MST is to help family acquire these skills so that they can function without any formal systems in place. We want to avoid out-of-home placement is what we're working to do. I found a stat recently, 75% of our nation's mental health dollars for children and adolescents are spent on out-of-home placements. Some of the theoretical assumptions. We know that environments play a huge role in an individual's behaviors. Specifically for juveniles, the peers that they associate can kind of tell us, well, if they're associating with delinquent peers, then most likely they too will be engaged in delinquent behaviors. So if we can change their peer group, then we can reduce the risk of being involved in delinquent behaviors. We often remind parents and guardians that it's typically going to get worse before it gets better, because a lot of times parents will say, oh, this is not working, now he's doing this, and we remind them, well, that's because the child is realizing you're putting some new skills into place, you're using new strategies the child is not used to. Give it some time, and then we see the behaviors come and decrease again. This is the ecological model here that we use. Basically, it demonstrates the various systems that influence youth behavior and the relative power of that influence. So as you can see, the family is the closest system to that child. So all of our focus is on the family so that we can help stimulate change. Then we go into the peers, with the peers, the school, the neighborhood, and the community. Now, where would you think that an MST therapist would fit in looking on the ecological model? The community. So as you've noticed, we're way out on the outside. So again, like I tell my therapist, we're here 3 to 4 months. After that, the family has to maintain this change on their own. So that is where our primary focus is working with the family. So the family can include people in the immediate household and family members, of course, outside of the household. We've even had some families where we've actually included neighbors that were willing to help. Right here we have causal models of delinquency and drug use. So we can see the delinquent behaviors here on the right. So with MST, of course, we're working to decrease or eliminate delinquent behaviors. So in order to get the desired behavior, what we would then do is work on improving the areas located on the left, which are the low parental monitoring, the low affection, the high conflict, and we would also want to work on school involvement. We want to strengthen the home-school link. Some common findings that we have. Again, MST has it's been over 50 years of research there. It's typically considered a new program. It's not new, it's new to our area in that MST has only had Magnolia, has only had the MST program for the last year. Research actually dates back to the 70s, but it wasn't until 1994 where they actually developed a protocol for implementing MST in communities. So from 94 to present, we've had MST in our communities. But some of the risk factors there that we address. One in particular that we come across a lot is low monitoring. And it's not because the parent does not want to monitor their child, but a lot of our clients are living in single-parent households. So with that being said, if the child gets off the school bus at 2:30, mom doesn't get home from work at 6, as we can see, there's a big gap for a lot of things to happen. We had one little guy actually who got involved in some serious crime, actually a felony during that time, and he's involved with the court system now because within 2 hours he made a decision that ended up getting him involved in the court system. Some implications for effective intervention. So these are the things that we need in order for services to be effective. They have to be comprehensive. They have to be individualized to the family's strengths and needs. We always complete a strengths and needs assessment upon a client initially coming in to receive services from our agency. And basically the strengths are identified for the family, for the peer group, the school, and also the community. So a lot of times with community weaknesses is what we see is if the family is living in an area where there's a high amount of crime, or where, such in our area, what we come across is that there's not enough resources, activities for kids to do when they get out of school. Of course, too, it has to be delivered in their natural environment. As was mentioned with the presentation earlier, you'll notice a lot of similarities. Here's the video that we have, actually a YouTube video. You can also find it on the MST Services website, but it's Sending Kids to Jail Does Not Work is what it's titled.
I have placed kids on probation. I have watched them come back. And it becomes a revolving wheel. A lot of times our kids go into institutions that are hardware secure, penal institutions, and I believe if you raise a teenager in a prison, you're probably raising a convict.
Most of them go to facilities where They don't get a lot of services, and they spend all their time hanging out with other really obnoxious kids, so they come back worse and they learn more problems and more different types of criminal activity and antisocial behavior to pursue when they come home.
You know, an incarcerated kid, not much rehab goes on. Now, I know that's not because they don't try, but really it requires a great deal of effort on everyone's part.
They forced me to put her into residential care. It was either that or into the juvenile system, and she seemed to be getting even worse.
Delinquent kids don't talk about, pi. They don't talk about solving quadratic equations. They talk about antisocial stuff. So they're not reading, some novel for English players. They're talking about getting high. They're talking about, getting back at somebody who's wronged them, and their peers are saying, yeah, man, right on.
I mean, think about it logically. Your kid, you have a 15, 16-year-old kid, gets into trouble, Do you think your kid's going to go off to 6 months in a state detention facility and come back better and more pro-social? I mean, think about it if it was your kid. I mean, what's the probability? That's just not going to happen. Aside from the fact that the research shows that that's not the case, and the research shows that, effective services that treat the risk problems where the risk problems happen get better outcomes.
So as I mentioned earlier, again, the behaviors may decrease while they're in these settings, but of course we know that one day they will be released. So will the parents be able to then maintain the desired behaviors? How does MST work? Again, like I said, it uses evidence-based treatment. So we're doing a lot of behavioral therapy, a lot of cognitive behavioral therapy, and so forth. Also, if there's need for treatment of ADHD and other mental health issues. So how does MST work continued? The MST philosophy is they're really big on being accountable for outcomes. So I myself, as the supervisor, I'm accountable for my therapist's outcomes, and they are accountable, and myself, for the outcomes that we make with the families. So, and another thing that MST does, it removes barriers to service access. Does anyone know what the number one barrier to a person receiving services is for any area, whether it be this area or the next town or the next state? What is the number one barrier? Transportation. You're absolutely right. So we eliminate that barrier, like I said, from the assessment all the way to the termination plans. We're in the home, we're in their natural ecology. So like it was mentioned earlier, it's not always the home. We've gone to a grandma's house, if that's where the family wants to meet for that day. We've gone to possibly the neighbor's house, depending upon their relationship with that neighbor. Traditional office-based outpatient mental health services for children and adolescents have shown little evidence of effectiveness. So we haven't seen the results that we've seen with MST. So how is MST implemented? Our one full team consists of one supervisor, 4 therapists. Our caseloads are relatively small. We have anywhere from 4 to 6 families at a time. We're available 24 hours, 7 days a week, So I today am here myself, and I have all of my team members here except one because she's sick today. So if you hear a pager, that's because we have an emergency, because we're literally on call 24/7. Treatment typically lasts anywhere from 3 to 5 months. Typically, it's about 4 months on average. Again, the work is done in the home, in the community, in the schools, and so forth. We deliver all treatment. No services are brokered out with MST. We have a never-ending focus on engagement. Again, we're accountable for that. And if we do not have buy-in from either, first of all, the family members or stakeholders, then no matter what kind of intervention we put into place, we will not be successful until we've got that buy-in. One more video, and this one's titled MST on Call 24/7.
As a new family being referred to MST, you can expect a therapist who's going to actually be considered social support to you while you're going through the program and the process. The therapist would work with you in your environment. The therapist would come out to the home, go to school meetings, just help you put different things in place. I usually tell them to expect me to be in your face every day in the beginning. If I'm not going to be seeing you, that I will be calling you. I tell them that I'm available to them 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I give them my cell number. If something comes up, you give me a call so we can talk about it, so I can work you through it.
And there were times when I called and said, I really need to see you guys tonight. And they were there. They were able to do that because they only take a few cases on so that they are available to the families.
We have a small caseload so that we can provide the intensive individual care because, of course, if we had a lot, we couldn't do that. So we see the family sometimes every day if we need to. We help them manage crises so that they won't be a crisis anymore and they can understand how to manage themselves. So we keep the caseload small so that allows for the therapist to be more available to the family.
Okay, and with that being said, as the therapist mentioned, you actually become a part of their families. A lot of times I'll have parents or guardians give me a call and they say, can I stay in this program longer? So I first of all explore, well, why do you feel like you need to stay in this program longer? And it's not because they haven't brought about any change in their home, it's because they don't want to part ways with their therapist. And so that's an issue that we've seen, and it's a good issue to have because then it reflects that we have high engagement with those families. Again, we'll look a little bit on to the quality assurance system that we have. For each one of us, the therapists are responsible. They have a TAMS, which is called a therapist adherence model. So each family is surveyed every 4 weeks to determine how closely they're following the MST model. The therapists every other month complete a survey for myself that indicates how well I myself as a supervisor am adhering to the model. So again, there's a lot of accountability. There's a 5-day training we must all attend before providing any type of MST services, and weekly we call in to meet to speak with a consultant and review our cases. He is considered the MST expert. So I always remind my therapist that this is not your kind of therapy you're doing, this is not Jamella's therapy, but we're adhering to this model. And so we have to follow the guidelines set forth in the directives given by our consultant. We also have the weekly clinical supervision, of course, individual. We use a lot of recordings. Of course, the families have the option to opt out of having the session recording. We let them know that this is for educational purposes and that the recordings are not kept after that. I also do a lot of field visits with the therapist so that if they need any assistance in working these cases, they know that they have that support. This is kind of the organizational chart that we have here. It actually shows you how everything flows, but if you can look into the circle that says the youth and the family, and you see the dotted line and it comes down, you see the lower right box that says therapist adherence model. So you see that the way that we deliver the model is directly connected to the outcomes that we're going to see with the family. So that's why MST is really cautious and focused on us adhering to the model because it has been directly related to outcomes with families. So we'll talk about the treatment principles. And so in using the MST models, we're expected to follow these 9 principles. The first one is to actually find the fit. And basically when we find the fit, we try to make sense of the youth's behavior in the context of their environment. So we look at different drivers on the individual level, the family level, the peer level, again, the school and the community level. So maybe on the family level, we would see a driver such as low monitoring. Then again, on the community level, as I mentioned earlier, they live in a neighborhood where there's a lot of high crime. That obviously could be a driver contributing to that behavior. We try to remain very positive and strength focused. We focus on the individual's strengths and the family's strengths. For example, a family may view a child's misbehavior as a poor reflection on their own parenting skills. So a lot of times, parents that'll say, well, my oldest 4, one lady recently told me, are fine and doing good. It's just this last one is giving me all some trouble. I don't know what I did wrong. And so we try to reframe that for her and let her know there's nothing that you did wrong, but of course, different things work for different people, and that was most likely the case. Of course, we want to increase responsibility. Again, because we're only going to be there for a short amount of time, we want to involve all key participants and get them involved. We also want the youth to take responsibility for his or her behavior. However, unlike other treatments in which the therapist works directly with the youth, MST therapists work primarily with the parents. because they are responsible for helping bring about change in the youth. So a lot of times I'll get calls from stakeholders and they say, oh, I talked to the family and they said you haven't met with the child at all this week. And I said, well, there's no discrepancy in that. That's the truth. We haven't, because we don't need to meet with John if we're meeting with mom, and that's it's not necessary. They said, well, he's suffering from anger issues. Can't you do some anger management? And I said, well, kids don't get angry overnight. There's something that happened that brought about that anger. So what we're going to do is we're going to identify first what that anger is for John. Is it in the form of physical aggression? Is it in the form of verbal aggression? And then we're going to find the drivers that are contributing to it. Because if there's high conflict in the home, maybe that's contributing to his anger. I had a situation recently where mom didn't like how the child was talking to her. She doesn't like him cursing her. So we began to explore family communications, and we found out, well, there's a pattern in the family curses at one another. So how can you expect the youth to change if the whole family is not going to change? So what we're doing with that family now is we're working on improving communication amongst family members. Of course, we know that previous delinquent behaviors can predict future criminal behaviors and so forth and delinquent behaviors. But we want to remain present focused, because with MST we keep in mind that we cannot change the past. However, if there are cognitions such as, a child stole a car, I stole my dad's car to get back at him for abusing me when I was younger, then we would address it, but we would focus on those cognitions then. We would not focus on the abuse from the past. We target sequence, and basically this is a pattern direction. By examining the sequences, the clinician can determine the earliest point in the sequence to intervene with the less necessary change to alter the sequence. So there's a lot of role play here. So we go back, we look at what happened, we try to see where we could have intervened to do things differently. Always make sure things are developmentally appropriate. Sometimes we have parents who cannot read or write, so if we give them a homework assignment, obviously we're not going to give them a worksheet and expect for them to complete it when we come back. So all interventions are to meet the needs of the individual youth and the family members. There's always continuous effort. So we check in to make sure that family members are implementing different interventions that we've discussed and how progress is going. We also evaluate, and there's accountability. And so I always remind people, we have to trust, but we have to verify. So if mom says this is the progress that little John is making, don't go by just mom's word, but let's gather from other family members and other key participants so that we know it is across the board they've seen a change in the behavior. Generalization, we want to be able to take the skills and we want the family to be able to maintain them long term. This often helps too, because a lot of times if we're working with a family to implement a behavior plan for one child and they're also having some issues with another child, they can then take those skills and develop a behavior plan for that one as well. This is actually the analytical process that we use with MST. Basically, the referral behavior comes in like I spoke about earlier. We identify desired outcomes by key participants, and then we develop overarching goals, and then we go from there and doing our assessment, or what is called the FIT. And then we develop intermediary goals and then do our intervention development and implementation. And as you can see, it's a continuous cycle because we're always reassessing. This slide basically here shows the number of youth for criminal charges was actually 36% lower for families with a maximum TAM score, and that's again the therapist adherence model. So the next few slides we're going to talk about the MST heritage, like I said, over 25 years of research. The next slide, I'm not going to go through all of this stuff, but it just shows you some different studies that have been done. And of course, the research, again, is ongoing. Some of the outcomes with MST, all of the outcomes, I should say, with MST have been consistent. So as we see here, there's been a decreased long-term rate of rearrest. Actually, it went from 70% to 25 there, 47% to 65% decrease in long-term rates of days in out-of-home placement. But of course, none of this happens without adherence to MST. Some different, adaptations that we've had here. As far as I know, there are currently none of these pilot programs are being done in Louisiana. There are a couple that I've met people that are actually working on these pilot programs in states such as New Mexico and California further out west. But as far as I know, there are none here, but we can expect that to reach us at some point. I'm just going to go over the Missouri Delinquency Project really quick, which basically a lot of what we currently practice in MST was based upon this early research. This slide here tells us some different characteristics of the offenders that were in this study here. Average age was 14.8 years and so forth. There were no significant differences, though, in outcomes based on ethnic or racial group of the youth or family. Again, some more stats there for that particular study. And then looking here, the study found that changes in the family resulted in immediate changes in the youth, problems, behaviors during treatment, better than standard individual treatment that focused on individual factors. So if we're looking at ultimate outcomes, which are sustained long after treatment, after termination of treatment. And so a lot of times the question is asked, is MST soft on crime, or do we use a harm reduction approach? And the answer would be no, because a lot of times our referrals are coming from OJJ and they said, well, this person has to complete so many hours of community service. And we said, okay, that's fine, and we're supportive of that. What we do is then we just plug it into the treatment plan. So then we work with the families to help meet that goal. So a lot of times what we see is that families will wait until the very end, the deadline. So our role as the MST therapist is to say, hey, let's start getting some of this done now and help the family identify places where they can complete their hours. This graphic looks at the percentage of offenders not rearrested. So if you've noticed, 70% of MST completers were not rearrested in 5 years. So if you could implement a treatment in your program, in your community, that could result in 70% of youth not being rearrested in 5 years, would we want that in our community? And I know the answer is yes for myself, and I assume it's yes for you all. Because of course, as we know, this would reduce the cost to taxpayers in incarcerating juveniles. Again, this is a 14-year follow-up of the same study. So here we have some information on the participants and outcomes. Some more stats on long-term outcomes we have there. And then I'm going to look at the bar graph here. So we see that there was a 54% reduction in arrest with MST. And if you look, there's a significant difference compared to individual therapy. Again, for violent arrest, there's a 59% reduction. Drug-related arrests, we see a significant difference in that as well. Adult days confined, again at the 14-year follow-up, so keep in mind they're older. So again, there's a big difference there, which of course can be translated into dollars saved. On probation, a 43% difference. And then we have the next one is the Simpsonville study. So this study actually, the previous study was done, it was university-based. So the supervisor was a university professor and the MST therapists were grad students. With this study, there's different. It was actually conducted in the real world. So the offenders were more violent. We have 54% were violent offenders, anything from manslaughter to aggravated assaults. Some of the project goals there, of course, to reduce criminal activity and cost of services. There are areas that MST works with families to improve. These were the areas, again, that they were working to improve. Some of the results, again, we see a significant difference in this study as well. Here's one that actually shows the dollar amounts. As we can see, it's a significant difference from $8,000 to $20,000. Again, like I said, always highlight you yourselves as we're all taxpayers, so we're paying for these services. So you can see a significant difference. And people say that MST is expensive. It's expensive now, but it will be more expensive in the long run if we have to pay to have these children incarcerated. Another follow-up there. And we'll see that MST, the rearrest, is not as high as usual services. And back again to the quality assurance system, and it's just, this study wanted to evaluate the model and how it helps in achieving the desired outcomes. I actually pulled this from the MST Services website. It goes to show you, I like the quote at the end where it says that every dollar spent in Midland County, Michigan can be expected to return $12.40 to $38.52 to taxpayers and crime victims in the year ahead. So there again, it tells us that MST is worth it now so that we can have those outcomes later on. That's a quote by a judge. I like this one too because, of course, by not sending rehabilitated youth back into the same dysfunctional environment, because again, like I mentioned earlier, their behaviors probably decreased or were completely eliminated in that setting, but then we're returning them to the same dysfunctional environment. So we should expect to see them to be incarcerated again. And looking at the program development, though, what happens is someone actually comes down to your area and completes a site assessment. A site assessment is to identify the need for an MST program in your area. So that was actually done for Magnolia Family Services last summer. With the program developed, our target population for us at Magnolia is actually from the ages of 11 to 17. Our referral sources include the Office of Juvenile Justice, City Court, FINS, the Office of Mental Health, and many other agencies as well, also DCFS. And if I've left any of you out, I apologize. Our referral criteria, if they have to be exhibiting delinquent behaviors, and I always tell stakeholders, if the delinquent behaviors are due to a mental health issue, then that client would not be appropriate for MST because we do not focus on, we don't use the medical model in focusing on med management and the diagnosis and so forth. Rather, we focus on what in the environment is contributing to the delinquent behavior. But we see anything from status offenses such as curfew violations, truancy, running away. Here in Terrebonne Parish, they commonly listed as uncontrollable juvenile. We see a lot of physical aggression too, assault, simple burglary, robbery. I have a recent one with a charge of armed robbery, and also things such as grand theft auto. So again with this slide, it's highlighting the quality assurance process. If we begin to drift from the model, then we can expect our outcomes to not be what we actually are trying to achieve. MST staff training. We do the 5-day initial before we can begin providing MST services. Every 3 months, our MST expert will travel to our hometown and he provides a 2-day booster training to all of us. And we also are all responsible for having clinician development plans, which helps us to identify our strengths and our needs, and then we implement different strategies to help improve those areas. So staff training. I've been asked before, one guy told me, he said, well, this seems like a cut and copy form of treatment. And I said, what do you mean by that? And he says, well, you're doing your fits and you're coming up with low monitoring all the time and then you're putting in these different interventions. But I said, keep in mind, the interventions, of course, will vary from family to family. And they must be connected to the referral behaviors. So we have to, I tell my therapist, we have to be creative in the interventions, but of course the family must always be included in the interventions. If we don't have their buy-in and their alignment with the interventions, do you think mom and dad are going to implement them when the therapist leaves the home? Absolutely not. So just some different drift indicators. All of our data as far as our adherence and different stats for our program are all collected by a database, actually through the MST Institute. So again, looking at the fidelity to the treatment model, research tells us that high adherence to the treatment model, of course, improves outcomes. One of the most common problems encountered with this population is that the youth and family rarely access services, even when the services are court-ordered. So, a lot of times our kids are involved in the system, so we tell the judges and the other court personnel to be patient with us and let us try to get the family engaged rather than saying, if you don't do this, this is what's going to happen, and so forth. So MST is dedicated to removing all barriers to youth and families actively engaging. So like I said, rather than coming down and trying to be forceful, we try to identify, well, what are the reasons why you wouldn't want to participate, and then we go from there. Again, it lists some of the different stakeholders there. Like I said earlier, all of them are not mentioned. Of course, to have an effective MST program, there has to be a constant availability of appropriate referrals. And with that comes, stakeholders have to have knowledge of MST. Without knowledge of MST, of course, we know we're not going to have those referrals. So we do a lot of different marketing, we do trainings and so forth to help educate our stakeholders in the area on MST. So we have a clearly defined target population as well.
All the referrals then come from DCFS, not from, or primarily from them to you?
We do get...
As a CASA advocate, I couldn't contact you. I'd have to go through caseworker.
You could, but keep in mind, like with MST, our goal is to avoid out-of-home placement. So like if the child has already been removed from the home and is placed in foster care, and then we don't know if that home is going to be permanent, then of course MST wouldn't be appropriate for that child. So we spoke to one of our colleagues at the DCFS most recently, and she stated, well, a lot of my kids have already been removed from the home. You know, and so that was the case. So a lot of our cases right now are coming from OJJ. Is it? No. Okay, so the question is, if the family is reunified and during the observation the worker thinks that the child may be appropriate for MST, can the child be referred? And the answer to that question is yes, the child can be referred, because if the worker felt that there was a risk of that child being removed from the home again, then MST could provide services to hopefully prevent that from taking place. Any other questions?
What parishes are you in? All parishes around the state of Louisiana?
So the question is, what parishes are we in? We're currently serving Terrebonne Parish. We do serve some areas of Lafourche, and so that would be limited to like Thibodaux. I know sometimes Lafourche covers a little bit of Gray. We also cover Raceland as well. And so I know there's been concerns mentioned that those lower lying regions of Lafourche are not getting services such as Galliano, but keep in mind, you have to have the manpower, and right now, with MST being, our program being new, we don't have the resources to go into those areas. So at this time, it would be primarily Houma, Thibodaux, Gray, Raceland, and Bayou Blue. And you look sad.
I am. I'm in Tangible Hope.
You may have an MST. I know Kingsley House is here, and they have an MST team. And you may, if they don't know who services that area, there may be another MST program that's closer to you.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Is there a website that has all the MST programs on it?
Yeah, you can actually find a list of all the programs actually throughout the entire world. At the end of the website, at the end of this PowerPoint, I actually have the website address, and I guess it just clicked. I guess we're okay to. Okay. So some influences within the provider organization. I always tell therapists when they're looking to apply with us, this is not your typical 8 to 5 job. You don't get to go home at 5 and say I'm not seeing clients, at 6 o'clock. Our schedules are very flex, so that allows for flex time. So if you see my therapist out, at Marshall's during the day, don't think they're, trying to be slick and shopping on the job. They're working flex time is what they're doing. You might catch myself there, if you shop there. Some different influences within the clinical context or team. Again, the caseloads are very low. We have adequate on-call coverage, and all these elements are required program practices. As was mentioned earlier, I know Claudette, you brought up a good point. Why is there high turnover? Well, first of all, with social services, we know that the work is often difficult and sometimes we're underpaid. And so, of course, with MST, it doesn't exclude, MST is not excluded from that. It's not an easy job, as most jobs are not easy. So we're always looking to learn new ideas and strategies and to open critical feedback on work. Some potential barriers in therapists. A lot of times people think that they can do this, or this is the population I want to work with, but if they're not able to adapt and to adhere to that model, and they say this is not a fit for me, I always just leave it at that, and I say, well, that's probably, I'm taking your word for it, and we may want to start looking for employment elsewhere for yourself. So why is MST successful? In a nice way. I always do it in a nice way, but it's the honest to God truth. If you don't think you can adhere to the model, then we know the outcomes are not going to be what they should be. And so families should not get the short end of the deal because you don't feel like you can adhere to the model. So why is MST successful? We target known causes of delinquency. Again, it's family driven. As providers, we're accountable for the services that we provide. We're well trained and supportive, and of course, we try to initiate positive interagency relations. Some quotes there. These are actual quotes from clients that we've serviced in either Terrebonne or Lafourche Parish, and so you'll read a few of them there. You know, MST helped me when I was really stressed out. And we had a mother recently tell us that every mother could benefit from MST. And so there's the website there that you can find more information on MST. But real quickly, in those packet of the blue folders that you all have, there are a few different forms in there. The first one that should be on your left-hand side should be a feedback form. We'd appreciate your feedback because, of course, the one main factor in having a successful MST program is having buy-in from your stakeholders. So you all here today are stakeholders. So I'd like you all to provide us with feedback if you can. Our team is sitting up here at this table, so if you can just turn those sheets in, that would be a great help. You're not only helping us, but you're helping us help the families that we serve through Magnolia. The second form is actually a program overview. So it gives you basically a lot of what was mentioned today in one worksheet. The third form should actually be an MST referral form. So if you have a referral that you think may be appropriate for MST, you can fill it out and fax it to me, or you can give me a call. I don't really have a preference. If you don't like to write, I like to write, so I'll take the notes if you make the call to me. I also have the MST brochure there because not only do we have multisystemic therapy, but we also have a mental health rehab program, and that's primarily what we've been known for. Any questions or comments before we close? Yes, that is my contact information there. Fax number
985-449-4178.
And it should be on the brochure or the business card.
It's on the form.
Questions? Are there any other questions? I thought I had one more in the back. Yes, ma'am.
So y'all don't provide any reunification services at all?
No, ma'am. Not at Magnolia. I'm not sure if there are any other services in the area. We can ask some other professionals. They may know, but not at Magnolia. What we do, like I said, is work on preventing reunification, basically. Any other questions or comments? Okay, well, thank you all for having me today, and if you should need to contact us, like I said, our office is located in Thibodaux, but feel free to give us a call. Thank you.